I was browsing SG and somebody posted a question. Why don't they just drop a nuke on the zone? Somebody replied to it saying that it was apparently a planned ending, which got me curious. What were the planned endings versus what we actually got? So naturally, we're going to have to translate this. So there's a bit of discrepancy here. You should note that chess becomes Chernobyl, which is not the same thing. Chess meaning the Chernobyl atomic electric station, roughly. And this is Chernobyl, so Google Translate. Anyway, inside the chest is a black crystal. The stalkers named it Monolith. According to the legend, which the stalkers pass to each other, Monolith fulfills the inner desire of the man who came to him. The main thing is to get to him. The vision of the Monolith is the action of the third psychotropic plant from Laboratory X. If the installation is turned off, then the call and vision of the Monolith disappear, and the floor of the sarcophagus is... If the installation is turned off, the call and vision of the Monolith disappear, and the floor of the sarcophagus is littered with half-decomposed remains of human bodies. If one of the stalkers is affected by the Monolith and the player has disabled the installation, then the stalker will wake up and come to his senses. He will tell you what visions he had, however, the stalker does not have long to live, too much radiation exposure. Phantom formations. As the player approaches the nuclear power plant, black phantom formations appear all around. While the installation is operating in Laboratory X, as usually happens with strong psychotropic effects. The call of the Monolith. Everyone who approaches the nuclear power plant succumbs to the call of the Monolith. They cannot resist it. The call pulls them into a purest sarcophagus, where a gigantic black giant of crystalline form opens their eyes. End of the game. Wish fulfillment. Depending on how the player played and what decisions he made during the passage, this will fulfill the player's wish. The Monolith fulfills one's innermost wish. He plunges the newcomer into a final sleep. The stalker sees vivid visions of fulfilled desires. All the visitors sink into a coma, into which they stay for about a week, after which they die. It seems like some of these just have a little bit of slight variation than the ones we got, which is interesting to read. Like the first one, I want to become incredibly rich, which is executed if the player saved more money than he spent while haggling heavily. The hum of the Monolith changes frequency, then a flash, and the Monolith disappears, and the stalker is already far from the station. The stalker goes off into the fog, and the voice tells how the stalker returned and discovered incredible wealth. The zone lost its power, and the stalker became the richest man in the world, and all the benefits, all the luxury was at his feet. I want the zone to disappear, and everyone who died in it to come back to life, which is executed if the player joins duty. The hum of the Monolith changes frequency, then a flash, and it disappears, and the stalker is already far from the station. The stalker goes off into the fog, and the voice tells how he returned and found that the zone was gone. The dead in the zone had returned, but he was the only one who had any memory of what was happening in the zone. The world had forgotten there was a zone, all traces had disappeared. I want the zone to swallow up the whole Earth, is executed if the player killed more people than mutants. The voice tells how the stalker returned and found there was no way out of the zone because it had swallowed up the entire Earth. And the stalker and the remnants of humanity were fighting for survival, but there was no hope. He was left alone in the midst of the desert that the world had become, the last man on the planet, under a boiling sky of incipient ejection. Well, the mission. I want to become the ruler of the whole Earth is executed if the player has bought too many weapons. The stalker returns and found that the zone had retreated, and a huge number of people were meeting him. The moment he turned to the Monolith, all governments disappeared, and the world changed. Because only one person has the right to decide what humanity should be like, and that person is him. I want to become immortal is executed if the player has saved too much. The zone slowly loses its strength and disappears, swallowing itself. As the years passed, everyone who had ever surrounded a stalker grew older, and he was the only one who remained as young as when he returned from the Monolith. Decades and centuries passed, humanity was changing, and only one person remained the same. I want the cursed humanity to disappear is executed if the player fought against everyone. The voice tells how the stalker returned and discovered empty cities. All the people disappeared and the animals gradually settled into deserted dwellings. The stalker traveled the world, but everywhere he met only the silence of empty cities. Happiness to all, and may no one leave offended. It's fulfilled if the player helped everyone in need. The voice tells how the stalker returned and found that the zone was gone. But the world has changed, and all people have woken up as if from a 1,000-year dream, and realized what they are doing, and everyone got what they wanted, and everyone helped each other. This commenter adds a bit to the discussion, saying, By the way, I remember reading an alternate SOC ending a long time ago, but can't seem to find the place. In it, the protagonist runs into some sort of entity in the generators, only for said entity to overcome him. Then the protagonist travels out of the zone, is interviewed on TV, then suddenly screams silently, killing the entire world. Do you happen to know if this is an actual planned ending, or did I read someone's fanfic? Yes, such an ending was considered early on and can be found in 2002 design documents. The entity, known as the Invisible Entity, was supposed to dwell in the lab under the generators, which the player would have to turn off. It would be completely mad, perhaps due to the fact that it was very intelligent and powerful, but was unable to leave the lab and was stuck in it for years all alone. It would try to destroy everything inside the lab and stop the player, and at the same time would ask him questions and have some kind of monologue. It wouldn't overcome the player, though. The player would manage to defeat it and turn off the generators. Then, after returning to the surface, he would be apprehended by some people in closed suits, perhaps members of the group. They would use some device on the player, then there would be darkness. The player would hear some voices and would be taken somewhere. Generally, it is described in such a way that the player and the stalker himself wouldn't know what is happening to him. The player would make his way to the trader coordinate and tell him he must get out of the zone because he has important information for the government and the whole world. Eventually, the player would leave the trader and make his way out of the zone on his own. All the time, the darkness and lack of knowledge about what is going on would be present. The player would hear some kind of inhuman scream and then would find himself at a military checkpoint, with dead soldiers all around whom have been killed by it. Then the player would be apprehended again by military and some scientists, who perhaps also belong to the group. And again, some kind of device would be used on the stalker. The description of the ending itself looks like this. The stalker is brought into a special television audience. Hundreds of cameras are directed at him. His unconscious body is being carried by 3 scientists. They bring him into a transparent metal plastic cylinder in the middle of the hall, inject something, then close the cylinder, completely cutting him off from the outside world. Flashlights illuminate his awakening, not yet regaining consciousness. He examines the world around him, not understanding what is around him and who he is. Millions of spectators, presidents of countries, military councils, government officials, representatives of various organizations, are anxiously awaiting the awakening of the stalker. The danger that has hung over the world in recent days has gathered viewers in a crazy teleconference, the world and the stalker. The stalker brought information that will answer the question of whether humanity will be in tomorrow. The stalker looks through the transparent glass at the world around him. Voices appear again. They increase, flooding his darkening consciousness in waves, then again. An incredibly loud, sharp, inhuman half-scream, half-creak. Behind the glass, the stalker rages. He throws himself at the glass. His mouth is unbelievably open in a wild scream that goes on and on. The dead bodies of millions of spectators, presidents of countries, military councils, government officials lie. They lie with their ears covered, their mouths open in a scream. The message of the Chernobyl zone reached their ears. The story from the checkpoint was repeated on a global scale. And over the dead cities, clouds began to boil. The zone increases its territory.